can't do
So
this.
I have kind of like, you know, this is a great survey. And my question is, most surveys, they try to limit it to 5 or 6 questions because most people won't go beyond that. And I'm just wondering if we're defeating our own purpose here by having such a long survey. If people will just stop completing it or will only fill out part of it. I don't know the answer to that, but
we did talk about that, and we actually cut a bunch of questions out for that purpose.
Yeah, because most surveys, you know, usually they try to limit it 5, 6 questions at the most, because people's attention spans are not particularly good these days. Maybe getting better, but you know, it's not. I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't know if there's any research on it that actually, you know, can tell us.
If you look at the other surveys, though, you'll see, I mean, the surveys that are done for this particular purpose, they tend to be much lengthier than what you're suggesting. And I think you're right. I think there probably is some basis for trying to keep them shorter, but there's so much information we're trying to acquire, and it's been recognized in all the other town surveys as well. I mean, they go on for pages, quite honestly. Right. As a matter of fact, a couple of them, you can't even look down the list of questions without answering one and moving on to the other.
So, but the question then becomes is, how are they getting a lot of responses?
I don't know.
I mean, you know, I guess that's, I don't want all this work to have been done, which is such great work, and have it be that we get 30 responses that are complete back. You know, I don't know. I mean,
I know the Ardsley and Tarrytown submitted surveys, which I think are about the length of ours, and they got hundreds of responses back.
Oh, great. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, we're not talking
very engaging community.
We're not talking about whether you like Coke or Pepsi here.
I know.
This is kind of a little more serious than that. So
no, I understand that. I'm just raising the question because I'm just, you know, I don't want us to be.
No, it's a valid question, but I think out of necessity, we can't really shorten it to that. Okay. I mean, we couldn't even shorten it to 10 questions, never mind 5 or 7.
Right, right. No, I don't disagree. I'm just,
yeah.
It will be interesting to see what happens.
What might happen is you might have a whole bunch of people starting the survey and not finishing it. So in order for the survey to be submitted, do you have to finish the whole thing? Is that how
it's all interesting questions because we haven't set it out yet because it hasn't been formalized yet. So evidently one of the main reasons why people hire a professional company is because this is not intuitive and nor easy to set up. So we actually have some people that have been working on it. I'm hoping to get a draft of it tomorrow, but it hasn't gone out yet, and we were hoping it would go out on Monday and then Wednesday, and so we're still trying to set it up. You know,
is this electronic or is this going to be in paper?
No, electronic.
What about for the people who don't have computers? I mean, think about what's happening to our elders who can't get a vaccine appointment because they don't have access to the internet or don't use the internet.
Nobody can get an appointment, and even if
but you know,
they got one in Connecticut for my father. Believe it or not, Connecticut, Ridgefield, Saturday. We just scheduled it today. My 84-year-old father. Just so you know, just look at other states.
Well,
sorry,
Martha. I guess we could have a box by the police station if that's comfortable, or outside town hall. Up top where people can just pick up, if we just print a couple dozen
and then just, you know, put a thing in, you know, plain envelopes and just have people take and put it in.
I think that's good. I think the more we make it accessible for people, the more likely we'll get responses.
Would it be okay to put it in other places like the House of Worship or place where people get their coffee, or like?
Well, except most houses of worship are not meeting face to face. I mean, I usually have 15 to 20 people in worship. So
what about the village market? Everybody seems to be going in and out of there. You know, little places in town, maybe, you know, some of the storefronts in town where people are still going in, you know, they are going into Starbucks, they are going into Susan Lawrence, they're going into Rockies. You know, Chico's, Lang's. So if we could actually have some there, that would be really helpful, I think.
Okay. I don't know that by the time we get it out and how many responses we get that we're going to be able to use the information to inform this
okay.
Report. And so one of the things that we may want to talk about today is what we were actually using this information for, and whether or not we're using it as a baseline that will assist us moving forward in how to gauge how our changes, our proposed changes, may or may not be working, or other areas where changes may be. I'm sorry, Tiffany.
One question: the meeting wasn't called to order, so someone needs to call the meeting to order.
Okay, thank you.
So
sorry, that was my.
I guess that's my my job to call to
thank
order.
you, Tiffany. Let's call us to order.
Call to order the Thursday, January 21st, 2021 Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative Committee. Today we started. It's actually 6:09. Started at 6. That is our call to order. Old business, which we evidently sort of have already started discussing, which is the update of the survey. So let's continue the discussion of quote unquote old business.
Right. So I was curious, do we know what other communities were doing with the information? Do we know how they were using it?
We haven't, quite honestly, I haven't received, I haven't spoken to anybody at this point regarding the results from their surveys. It's something, and I think Hermion's here also on, I guess it's something that we should reach out and speak to the other people involved to see how they're handling it.
I've seen the results of at least the Ardsley survey, and they tabulated it by category, and they listed where it was write-ins. They listed what people wrote in.
Mm-hmm. Did they use it to inform on this report, Harvey?
I think it influenced, their report. I think on the Ardsley and the Tarrytown, one thing I remember is both of them asked what types of calls did the police, respond to the most. And in both situations, I think it was medical related calls and vehicle and traffic calls.
Probably alarms right up there too. Alarms.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Jill, your question though, you're asking that question because you're concerned that the results of this won't have it in time to influence our discussions. Is that your
right
question?
Yeah. So that was one concern I have, though. I mean, my feeling is that depending upon the recommendations that we come up with, we sort of had envisioned that this was not going to be a one and done sort of thing, that we would have a mechanism in place to be able to evaluate either modifications that we instituted or modifications that we contemplated, and to be able to just see how we're doing, at least establish this as a baseline, and perhaps be able to employ surveys going forward. Now that I understand that part of the reason to employ a professional company is the formatting, in addition to the proper verbiage on how to, properly present a question, it may be something that we want to consider going forward if the group decides that surveys are something that they would like to continue with. And it's certainly, a great, tool, but I'm thinking that there's definitely an art to this, and I know enough to know that I don't know anything about it. So I was happy to help and sort of clean the place, clean it up as best I could, but this is not my area of expertise. And there are people that do this professionally, and there's a reason why these people exist. So the only thing I would urge the group going forward is that if we decide that a survey is something that we want to do, that we look into getting a professional group that could help us get it out. They could assist us in, how long it should be, the format of what it should be, and help us articulate the topics that we want to focus on for the surveys going forward. And maybe this is a great survey to take and help us as a starting point so that we can get
that would also help in our tabulation of results too.
Yeah, because again, I'm hoping that we get a great bit, a lot of great information, and I'm afraid that, you need to know what to do with it. So anyhow, I sort of jumped ahead a little bit, even though we were talking about the, old business. So long and short of it is I'm hoping that the survey is going out, that we're going to get a draft of it tomorrow. I don't know that it's going to have the format that we would have liked it to have insofar as the horizontal questions that Hermione was, really had her heart set on. And I understand why it has a certain flow to it, but let's see what it comes out with and, see what we can do. At the end of the day, it was the best that we can do with no one on my staff knowing how to use the Survey Monkey, other than the, like almost like the complimentary ones, the ones that have like the 10 questions that are very simple in their formatting, and that we were good at. But when it came to, the horizontal questions.
So is it ready to go out, or would it benefit from a weekend and finding a resource who knows Survey Monkey who can?
I don't know of a resource. I have asked around. I've done the best I can with finding a resource. I will see what it looks like.
Okay.
There's a guy.
If you know.
Does Angela know? Hermione, does Angela know?
Right. There is someone on Angela's team. I think his name is Ian, who is an expert at that. I can certainly reach out again.
I mean, it sounds like it's already built. It's just a matter of kind of testing it and, maybe reformatting one or two questions if they're not quite what we, had hoped for, right?
Well, I'll see what this one ends up looking like, so.
Okay.
I just, we give surveys, and the ones that we're trying to get baseline data from, we don't develop ourselves. We do, like Jill is sharing, we do have an expert craft the questions and order the questions and build the survey in a way that makes sense scientifically. And a bunch of us, we have experience doing this, but we don't do this every day. So there's a lot of value in paying for it to be done. So it's done in a way that you can get the most data. Every piece of a survey matters.
Yeah. Like I said, I knew enough to know that out of my league, and that there's a reason why these people are professional and they do it every day, and there's a reason for it. But okay.
Back to your original question about what were other groups using the survey for?
Yes,
it definitely inspired a lot of their work on the police reform committee. In a lot of the, some of the people I spoke to said that a huge percentage of their residents were like, there is no problem. Why are we even doing this? Why there is no need for it? There is no problem. And the survey pretty much established that there was a problem. It also established that different groups experienced policing differently.
I'm sure that's true.
Right.
I'm sure that's true.
A lot of the free text and some of the answers that they received did inspire some of the recommendations they made.
Hermione, can I ask, what communities did you speak to people in?
I spoke to a gentleman from Schenectady, actually.
Oh, okay.
I also spoke to a woman who is in East Flatbush, which is fascinating because they have a notoriously awful police force. But even in a committee like that, they still had some form of pushback. And I spoke, I'm also in touch with the Westchester County Reform Committee. They're having a meeting next Thursday night as well. And so I'm in touch with that whole group within Westchester.
Did Westchester County actually do one for the county police?
No, they're just different groups of people on the, they might be doing one.
I just didn't see it. And, out of the, the samples that we had that were circulated, I just didn't see one for the Westchester County Police. I was just curious.
They're already at the draft stage as well.
So. I know they are. Yeah. So, okay.
it's made up of people from all over Westchester County. It's not one specific.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Jeremy, do you want to take us through the topics that we identified for further discussion for today?
I do. I'm not on mute. Okay, super. Hold on. Let me just pull them back up.
Can I just say something real quick? So Harvey was kind enough to supply some language from the Westchester County draft. And Joe and I spoke and thought it'd be great to see their whole draft. So I reached out to the commissioner, spoke with him today. They're revising that draft. So he was uncomfortable sharing it, but as soon as I get it, I'll share it with the group.
Yeah, I just wanted to see, you know, exactly how detailed their recommendations were, you know, the breadth of them.
Yeah.
Curious.
There's quite a number of recommendations they put forth.
Okay. Tarrytown's draft is completed. I saw it today. I didn't get a chance to study, but I'll get it out to the group. When my brief looking at it, it was a lot of the same stuff we came up with.
Okay. Yeah, that's why I was surprised when Harvey did it that we only you know, that we only overlapped on 2 topics. I thought was surprising to me. But okay.
All right. So as everyone knows, throughout the course of the meetings, there's been a lot of issues that people have raised, and they wanted to circle back and put stickies on certain topics. So in no particular order other than what we have here, we'll start going one by one. And if anyone had if it was their issue or it was all of our issues, if they want to speak, I certainly will dictate how we want to share that. So the first thing that we wanted to address was additional crisis intervention training as related to mental health, and as well as to what is referred to as marginalized communities. And we have here language disability and other issues. So with that as the first topic, is there anything that people want to add? And I'm sure there are, because that's why we are coming back to it. No thoughts?
So I think we're talking about ongoing. We're talking about in the police training and the ongoing training, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I think I think we kind of came. A number of people came to a consensus. I'm not sure everybody that you know, it's a very difficult job, and mental health intervention is a very specialized area and requires a fair amount of knowledge, education, training, and that's something that probably should be pursued. Does anybody disagree with that thought?
So I'm sorry, I'm confused. Are we addressing mental health issues of the police, or we're addressing mental health issues in the community that the police confront?
Right, there were 2 issues. There was one, and we're talking about, I think, mental health training, how, you know, in dealing with the public. I think the other aspect,
right.
Yeah, right. The other item, which is perhaps mental health evaluations or psychological evaluations, you know, on a regular basis, whether it's a year, every 2 years, every 3 years, or whatever, which is not done at this point. It's only done upon hiring. So those are 2 separate issues. I think we're talking about the mental health training vis-a-vis dealing with the public here.
Can I ask a question? So this phase of what we're doing, this is the phase where we are trying to say, we recommend that our officers have, you know, advanced training in de-escalation XYZ. Like, that's what this is for right now. Is that correct?
It's for us specifically, but I think practically speaking, for example, you know, additional training, there's money will have to come from somewhere. It's not just something we could say, let's do it, and then we just do it. So, you know, whether it's practical, whether we have to get county or state money, whatever it may be, that's not the real issue. It's just your thoughts on how we can be better here in Newcastle.
Yeah, I think Vince, what we're talking about is, like, if we segregate what our recommendations are hoped to be, what we expect them to be, one of the areas, I think, of our recommendations will include modifications to the training that exists. And I think this falls under that umbrella. Does that make sense?
I guess I just trying to get my mind about what we're trying to decide right now. An articulation of what additional crisis training for mental health means. Is that what we're trying to do?
Yes.
Well, yes.
Well, assuming people agree that the mental health training, additional mental health training is necessary. We have to go past that first, right, Jeremy?
Well, my thought is we're not skilled enough, with all due respect to all of us here, because we have different backgrounds and professions, to say what that mental health training should be, right? I mean, some people may have that background, but I certainly don't. So I think it's more general, saying that's what we want to pursue. And that's ultimately, if it is something that can be pursued, Chief Carroll, it's a recommendation, that would be something he would look at. But again, whether it's practical, the cost effectiveness of it, whether there's union issues, that's separate and apart. We're not going to resolve that here.
Right.
I think to identify it, and Chief has to then see how, if at all, he can run with that. Something for something that's, for example, far easier is what the next question is. I don't mean to jump to it, but a semi-annual community outreach program with a liaison for reporting personnel complaints. That certainly is something that is exponentially easier, a bit easier lift than what's above.
Yeah, it's true, but I'm also trying to take in the totality of all the work that we've done so far. And I kind of go back to the question of trying to have like the blue sky ideas, like this is kind of the time to suggest it. And for example, if I were to try and articulate it in some way, it's like, I would love it if our officers got the training and support that they were considered exceptionally skilled in de-escalation and in approaching people with an understanding, like a curiosity about what's going on, sir or ma'am. Like I would like them to be known for their exceptional ability to de-escalate, like as the big goal. And I don't want to lose sight of that as an aspiration. So
my thought, tell me if I'm wrong, and anyone can chime in, because I'm certainly not the expert in terms of everything that needs to be done. But my understanding is ultimately these are recommendations, and we can. It is more big picture, because Vince, you can maybe have an idea because of your background as a social worker. Mm-hmm. I may have some information a little bit because I'm a prosecutor, criminal lawyer, but Chief Carroll has to maybe look at this and say, these are the potential programs, these are the potential training. And then the next step would be, are these something that, or how much do these things cost? The next question would be, is there an issue with the union? Can it be done? So I think we don't want to get too caught into it, other than saying we want Chief to potentially look at this issue to better the police department. Is that your understanding, Chief?
It is. And I was thinking,
what you're saying, but otherwise we could spend hours and hours and hours just addressing this issue when we're really not equipped to say, this is a type of training, this is a type of program, how can we implement it, whether it can be implemented. It's more, here it is, Chief, figure it out.
And this was one of this is one of my suggestions during my internal review of what we do. I thought it'd be good to increase mental health training. I also thought, in my yearly, meeting with my lieutenants, what we're trying to plan for the next year, the year after, this would be something I wanted to incorporate. So I think our draft could say short-term goals, long-term goals. Short-term goal, we get that semi-annual community outreach together. Long-term goal, we participate in additional mental health training. So that's where I would see it going.
And then we have to identify. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but in all honesty, and I don't want to be glib. I think we're making recommendations. I don't want to take into account whether or not the union is going to agree with the recommendations. As far as I'm concerned, our job is to make the recommendations that we deem are necessary, and quite honestly, the state can deal with the union, because they're the ones who are ultimately going to have to deal with them.
We can come up with recommendations in Newcastle, and we can just make recommendations to the state.
Okay.
What I just said, I did not say we shouldn't make a recommendation.
Okay.
I said we should make the recommendation, and what it's cost and whether there's a union issue, that's something that can be determined later on. So I'm on the same page as you. Don't misunderstand what I said. Maybe I misunderstood. I apologize.
Okay. So we'd like increased mental health training for our officers.
Yeah, and I think Kimberly said, maybe we could add it to our statewide recommendations, additional mental health training in the academy.
Yeah, and we can even put it mental health intervention de-escalation training, because I think it all kinds, however they want to put it, however specific you want to make it. Yeah, I think that works.
And kind of coupled with that, I know we talked about it briefly, and I'm not sure if it makes sense, but does it make sense to have 1 or 2 staff members that have really intensive specialized training?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Definitely.
That would be, yeah. Like on a particular tour, you always have someone who has, if possible, has that training.
That would be
Or
difficult.
can be called on.
So this all like sort of ties into the pods that the Westchester County was talking about, where there would be mental health professionals that are on call, that are available to our police, so that when they walk into a situation and they, because of their training, they are able to recognize that they're dealing with a mental health issue, that they can get on the horn and get a trained professional there. I mean, I'm thrilled with the increased mental health training that will allow them to identify what they're dealing with and then appropriately hand it off to someone who is a skilled professional that can, you know, handle it appropriately from that point on. It's interesting. I did reach out to WEMS, Westchester EMS, and Al Kim, and he talked about, because one of the things that we had talked about as a group was, you know, can we call EMS to come and handle this instead of a police presence? And the problem is that there is often overlap between someone being disturbed and not compliant that makes it uncomfortable for EMS alone to handle a situation. And so although he was happy to assist, he felt that the Westchester County model of having this trained professional, you know, come with the police, or not to, you know, at least to continue to have the police have a role in the intervention, was something that he felt most comfortable with. So I was hoping it would be an instead of, but it's going to be an addition to.
I think it was much more functional. And we do currently have the ability to reach out at 24 hours a day virtually to a liaison with our department. It's not nearly the same as having somebody responding to the call, but it's more than we had before.
Right.
Is there a way, you know how I know everyone can take a call and everyone can respond, but then there's certain officers that you have that have special certifications in dealing with kids, right? They're the SROs, they have that. Is there like a certification program or some kind of specialized experience that certain officers on Newcastle could have that could make them particular experts on the staff itself? I don't know if that exists. That's why I'm asking. I know it exists for kids. So,
you know, I think there is, Christine. I think it's a good idea. You know, if we train, you know, 5, 6, 7 officers, you know, additionally, that they can either be respond to or be on call for, or, you know, yeah, it's a good idea.
You know, one of the things I'd like to just add into the conversation is that police officers and I have some sensibility about when a police officer is taken to a call and is there, they have to think on their feet. That is one of the things that's both kind of the cool part of the job and also the hard part of the job. And having to think on your feet means a lot of quick decisions, but I'm all for investing in all the police officers so that we build up the strengths they already have in ability to assess, understand more and more and more, because the support from the official mental health professionals or the EMS we need that. But the first person who comes, the police officer, has got to do a lot of thinking quickly. And that, I think, is a critical link in the whole picture. And to be able to build up their skills, it's going to be a big impact on the whole thing. The more
it's just not
broader they are, the better. It's just, that's what I don't want to lose that.
It's not realistic to give all my officers that additional qualification if it's out there.
No, I'm not asking that, but I'm not thinking there are steps between an official certification, 14 hours of classwork. There's a step between that where you're calling on the already strengths they have. And for me, what it is like with people that I work with, it's an hour-long meeting and a feedback loop and a discussion. That's enough to start building on people's strengths. So that's a model that I use, and I think it can be useful.
Vince, just to kind of couple on what you're saying. So like, for example, my administrative team, we all have training in sexual harassment, but then I have some people that have had some seriously in-depth training to support the work. So that's kind of like, I hear what you're saying. Everyone needs to have professional learning around a topic, but then there is some benefit, which is what I'm trying to say, in having some expertise on the staff, right?
Yeah, sure. There's always going to be benefit to that. It's just that I think there is a less formal way of building up the resources among the staff without it costing a lot of money and without a huge time commitment.
Right. Okay. So
we're going to move on to the semi-annual community outreach program with liaison for reporting personnel complaints, something similar to Ombudsman. I mean, this is, again, I think a relatively easy lift and something that could be very productive. Chief, have you thought any more of this?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was agreed. I agree with it, the survey, and I love, you know, and the liaison is great. And if it helps us get people to report that aren't, I'm all for it.
Right, and I assume that would be someone probably appointed by the town board.
Yeah, I would, yeah, I kind of look like it as to like the planning board, right?
Could it be you? You wouldn't want your own person, and maybe it would be an outside person.
I would want an outside person from the community.
Right. So would
anyone have any thoughts on that?
I was actually thinking that maybe it wouldn't be a single person for an ombudsman. Maybe it would be someone would have a choice of like 2 or 3 people, and they could choose who they want to approach. Male, female for one. You know, just the simplest sort of thing. Certainly, you know, a member of the BIPOC community. I'd love somebody from the Interfaith Council to, you know, be there, so that when someone comes and wants to take in and speak to someone about something that's happened in town, and whether, you know, it be directly with the police or whatever it is, and they don't feel comfortable speaking to the police, that there is someone else that they feel that they can speak to. And it may be a situation where a man doesn't want to speak to a woman, he'd rather speak to a man, woman versus woman, a BIPOC member community wants to.
I'm just not clear on the semi-annual community outreach program.
Yeah, I think we sort of blurred the lines here. I think I think we need to just,
different, right?
Yeah, I think we need to just back up. I was speaking about the ombudsman.
Right, but these should be 2 different bullets, right? Semi-annual
they really should be,
program is different from the liaison,
right?
Okay, because I was confused for a second.
Yeah, no,
liaison semi-annual.
Right.
But yeah, and I was thinking semi-annual outreach would be like, you know, a bigger version of Coffee with a Cop, right? You know, I'd set up, you know, a town meeting, right? You know, in a version of it that, hey, you know, the police department's going to be here on this day at this time. Come on out and, you know, meet with an officer, discuss your concerns, discuss what's going on in the community. You know, give an opportunity a couple times a year to do that.
Oh, okay. So then the bullet really ended after program, is what you're telling me.
Well, that's one. But I also thought, yeah, and then liaison for reporting personnel complaints is fine too. You know.
Got it. Well, yeah. I mean, how does the group feel about all?
With regard to the community outreach program, I feel like we talked a lot in this committee about wanting to make sure that we came up with community access points that felt welcoming to all residents of the community. And so, you know, I would just ask that in creating whatever sort of programs or events are going to be created, that we don't just do one static version, but that we think about different types of events, different organizations that we can partner with to host those events, or, you know, that it becomes something where we're kind of on a semi-annual basis being sort of creative about changing the dynamics of it, so that we're reaching not just the same segment of the population each time, but that we're, kind of making sure we're more inclusive in our approach.
Maybe each one of them could be with, in conjunction with CRE and the Interfaith Council,
Possibly, but I mean, maybe even among other communities, like, maybe you'd want to do one with CCSD where, you're really targeting kind of the young adult population. Like, I don't know, there could be different ways in which we do this. I just, I just want to make sure it's not just, kind of expanding coffee with a cup, but that we're actually thinking about different ways of structuring events.
Okay.
I can look for, say, a model policy of it and see what they come up with.
All right. The next, I'd be shocked if it's not done elsewhere. I'm sure there's something that we could.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we should go back to the liaison for reporting person.
I'm sorry.
The ombudsman. So what do you think? A group of 4, a group of 5? We would ask for people. The whole idea is that an anonymous complaint leaves everybody unsatisfied and the situation unresolved. The person who makes the complaint never learns what happened. They can't possibly feel satisfied that their concerns were addressed because they get no feedback. We may not have enough information for us to properly pursue it and do the follow-up. It's just.
Well, yeah. So would you make the ombudsman, would that be part, just thinking out loud here, part of our ethics committee, their ethics folks, like another position there, are totally separate and apart from that?
No, I would do it separate and apart. This is something that is unique for the police department. This would be, again, individuals that I would, give them a little bit of training just so that they know how to, maybe we just give them a questionnaire that they can generally, ask questions, but they would act as the liaison between the police department so that a complaint could be properly, investigated and thoroughly investigated. And we'd be able to turn around to our complainant, our victim, and they would feel protected by, this wall of anonymity, but also get some sort of satisfaction or relief or whatever, the adjective is there, that their complaint was properly investigated and there's a resolution that they feel comfortable with.
I'm sorry, but are we completely, we had come up earlier on with the possibility or the suggestion that maybe there be some type of separate office that can be, I don't know, within town hall or what have you, but basically an office. Herman, you had the particular language that you liked, but I think it was like an office of human rights or some type of ancillary office where people can bring things such as this to them, and then there would be whoever is within that office could then work with the police department to try to help this come to fruition. And that would be one way to satisfy perhaps the complainant who could remain anonymous, or if the confidence, if the person did develop some confidence in the system and what was happening based on the interaction with that representative from that office, then the anonymity would maybe go away, the necessity for it. Are we completely saying that we don't want something like that?
No.
Because that came up early on. I mean, I just thought that would be a good way to handle it.
I personally don't see somebody walking into town hall and knocking on a door and, talking to somebody at town hall if they have a problem with the police.
Well, no, I'm talking about a separate, well, it doesn't have to be at town hall. I'm talking about a separate office where somebody can bring these types, among other things, they can bring these types of things.
I'm sorry, is there a difference between an office and a committee, or an office and a group of people? You call it an office.
Well, it wouldn't be, all right.
Let me tell you what I like about what both of you are saying.
Okay.
I like that there is human connection, because as someone who's been operating with anonymous alerts, so what could potentially happen is that something could come in that needs to be immediately addressed. That could be totally false. And then all of a sudden the police has showed up at someone's house. I mean, that's like an extreme example, but that, and I deal with kids, so, you know, it's a different dynamic, but maybe not so much. So what that human connection does is it allows for a fleshed out conversation to really understand what the concerns are. So the structure of what that should be, I don't really know the best option for that, but I do know that having an anonymous system that has no human interaction, I see as could be potentially problematic for both the police and for the community that it's trying to assist. So I just want to
agree. Yeah, thank you.
Well, is there agreement then that there needs to be a human being who does this?
Oh, absolutely. So that's why I think Kim and I got tripped up where Kim said, "Oh, so we're abandoning the idea of an office," and I don't know how that's different from what I suggested. What does an office mean?
I guess with a separate label entirely. So, you know, it's not like somebody's going into the police department. They're not going into the administrator's office, you know, that type of thing. Just a whole different label that, you know, somewhat segregates them from those offices. And I guess, you know, I wasn't hearing that as being a possibility. And I think it might make a difference for somebody coming fresh in who wants to make a comment.
Kim, I feel like maybe it's just a matter of scale. So when I hear you say office, in my perception, I'm thinking like, oh, it's a suite and it's got a director and it's got 4 analysts who sit in it, because I'm thinking like a New York State sized office of something, right? Because that's the world that I've worked in. But we're so tiny, right? That we're never gonna have the volume that would warrant an office. We're never going to have the volume that would really warrant even a full-time person, right? So like, this is going to be somebody's responsibility on top of, right? Yeah. So I think it's sort of understanding that, yeah, we can call it the office of, or, you know, an ombudsman, or, you know, whatever that right sort of language is, we can put a name on it.
Right.
But it's not going to be like an office you walk into, as opposed to being somebody who's just designated to serve in that capacity.
Okay.
But the suggestion here is this is an arm's length relationship with the town in some way, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so,
but right. The point being is that we are identifying people in the community that would act as this intermediary, this.
So a voluntary post. So somebody volunteers to be the beyond the committee of 3-4 people, something like that.
Right. You know, I'm wondering, I'm trying to figure this out. We have what's called a safe church policy, which Kim helped us draft several years ago. And it actually lays out how someone makes a complaint against someone. And it can be through someone, like if I've done something that someone perceives, they don't come to me, they go to X person at the church, who then does the quote unquote investigation of it. And I'm wondering if we couldn't use that, something similar to that.
That sounds very interesting.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Why don't we go through all these bullet points, decide what we agree that we should move forward on, and then people
work out the details. Sure.
Yeah. So, you know, submit suggestions on how they see it working.
And Margaret,
and writing.
Martha, this is called the Safe Church.
It's called a Safe Church policy. And every church.
If you could forward that to me, I'd be very interested. But again, we're talking about somebody. I don't envision this to be a town employee. I envision this to be a community, a number of community members that would not be affiliated with the town. And again,
town hall, you know, town hall would
they could
have enough information to refer them to this group.
Right.
You know, I have to say, like, Chief, I'm sort of like, I feel like we're doing the work right now. Like, this is the work. And you want us to stop doing the work so that we can do other work and then come back to the work. I feel like, why don't we just go through it and take each one at a time and do the work.
Okay.
As we go.
Who's going to draft the recommendation? Or, you know, we haven't come to, everybody has different suggestions. You know, Jill's coming up with ideas, and I just feel like, you know, it's unfocused. That, you know what I mean? That's where.
Well, yeah, it's messy, but I think the thing is that if we're going to, like, that's, to me, goes back to process. So like, we have this discussion. Is our role now to sharpen this into a recommendation? Is that what we're supposed to be doing, so that then the recommendation is done and we move on? Or are we going to talk of these kind of ideas that are partially clear, partially not, and then leave it to you to do it? Like, again, I'm a little,
no.
What are we doing?
No, it's not for him to do.
Okay.
It seems like maybe a good way to do this is if there are, you know, we identify through going through this, here's an area that we know we need to get more information on, and here, this area we need to hone in on, and who wants to work on it, you know, and bring it back to the group, so that it's not everything done by large committee, but we break into perhaps subgroups who then kind of pass information back and forth, and then it's brought back to the group and say, okay, here's what we've learned, and you know, this is how this town is handling it, this is how that town is handling it. So we do both what Vince is suggesting and also what the chief is suggesting, so that we have, you know, we say, okay, we know that we want some kind of a liaison reporting program. Right. We know we want to work on that. Okay, so who's willing to kind of, you know, let's go, I think, work and go through at the same time, right? So we know that this needs more work, but we also know that the semi-annual community outreach program needs a little work as well. So we've identified two things. One needs a lot, perhaps a lot more, one needs less. And one or two people can take those ideas and work on it, and then come back to the full group. So it seems like that might be a way to do this.
And to follow up on what you're saying, Martha, you know, some things we don't need to recreate the wheel, because there's no doubt other municipalities and departments that are doing it already, whether it's in New York or out of it in a different state. So and then some things, I think I used the one before, you know, mental health training. I'm certainly not equipped to discuss what does that mean. I can say you need full-time training. What does it mean if I say, Vince, you need 6 hours a year or 32? I simply am not equipped to do that. So I think some of the stuff we shouldn't get caught in the weeds. We should allow Chief to do it. I think, as Martha said, also, we should ourselves try to break it out. And then on top of that, we should just go find where someone else has done it well and say, look, here's an example. So, and then,
okay, let's do that. And then are we supposed to vote? Like the structure of how these decisions gets made is still a little unclear to me. Let's say we come back with a proposal for the liaison thing, and it's a proposal, like, do we just vote? Or we all
I think we reach a consensus where, you know, you can kind of tell that the majority of people think this is a good idea. And if someone doesn't think it's a good idea, they can make their case for why they don't. And then, you know, we move through. I don't know that we need a vote, a hand vote of how many agree and how many disagree. I mean, I think everybody's sort of aware of what's working and what isn't working. And so, you know, if Jeremy says, okay, I'm getting mixed messages here. So, you know, let's go down in the weeds a little bit here on this, so we can see if everybody agrees we need to move forward with this or not.
I mean, ideally, you wouldn't want to vote, but if necessary, maybe on some issues, there'll have to be a vote.
Right.
Martha, you said something about we know what's working and what isn't working, but we also need to consider what will continue to work. And, you know, I think we really have to keep our focus on that, because I don't know that we really know everything that's working, because we are, to a great extent, dealing with a relatively small number of people that will only expand as the town gets older, and bigger, I should say. And I just wanted to clarify that office. I was looking back in my notes. The office that we had originally recommended through the CRE was going to be the Office of Human Rights and Racial Equity, so that any additional complaints could come through that office. It could be anonymous, etc. And in the alternative, I mean, I know Newcastle is small, and I understand that we're very restricted as to what we could create and, you know, utilize, but I don't know, and I'm throwing this out there in the dark. It seems to me that other surrounding towns might have issues of, you know, whether they're not numerous issues in this town. There might be more numerous issues of the same strength in another town. Why not see, is there a possibility that the communities could join and make this type of an office available to all of the people in their communities? I don't know. We were talking about the pods from Westchester County for mental health. It's just something out there, because I am concerned about people not feeling comfortable to make complaints, whether it's on a complaint just on the police department, or there's a racial complaint or something like that. So, and that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying we have to be wary of what will continue to work, what will work in the future that may be hardly identifiable now, given the scope of our population. But when you take into account the population we're talking about, it may be a large percentage of those people, but it's not a large percentage of our town people right now. And
Right.
That's what I think our focus has to be on.
Right, but since this is not going to be a one and done,
right?
I fully expect that the point is that we are putting things into action and they are going to be evaluated. That I personally, somebody who lives here and works here, would rather us start small with our community, because Mount Kisco is very different than we are. They have the county police patrolling. The police officers don't know the residents, vice versa. It's just a very different mindset. We opted not to go with the county police. This is not something that we ever seriously considered, even if it was at some point considered a financial advantage. We were not giving up our police force and our ability to take and hire certain people and set a certain policy in place. And so it would be my preference to see how we do ourselves. And if we need to go out further and expand, then we always have the other communities to take and lean on and create something together.
No, ideally, I agree with you. Ideally, I agree with you, but I don't want to necessarily give up on some ideas that I think could really benefit the people who need them. That's my only point. And I'm just bringing out alternative possibilities.
I wasn't suggesting we give up on anything. I'm just.
I know.
Okay, fine. Okay.
No, I didn't suggest. No. I'm just trying to make sure that we're focused on, things that will continue to work as our community grows larger and more diverse. That's all. And I just want to focus on that. That's all.
Okay.
So how are we going to do this then? That's back to my original question.
Process recommendation here. So we're on the second bullet. We've got a bunch still to get through this evening. And I was thinking, someone made the point earlier that maybe the thing to do here is to understand that for each of these that we believe we should include as a suggestion, we need to write them up as a recommendation, right? And so I think the idea that as we go through these, we're deciding in or out. So, and for anything that we think is an in, if we can get one person from the committee to take the lead on that, and maybe identify, one or two other people who might be able to support that person. If we can kind of come out of this meeting with, an identified leader for each one of the things that we want to include, and then sort of by the time of the next meeting, have that drafted recommendation. And I'm not saying it has to be the full plan for what that outreach program looks like or what that ombudsman's office looks like, but a paragraph for each one of these that flushes that out a little bit. Does that make sense?
That's what I was trying to say.
Who said it? See,
what she said. What she said.
That's what you get the big bucks for, Ivy.
All right, so shall we move forward?
I think
everything now has been thumbs up.
And just say, look for somebody to take the lead on mental health, on the community outreach program, and on the ombudsman.
I'll take the lead on the mental health. How's that?
That's appropriate. Vince, don't misconstrue why I say it's appropriate. It's for your background.
Because of my mental health status, is that what you don't mean to say?
So ombudsman would be separate. I mean, I think that's probably an easier lift because there's probably a lot of information out there to duplicate or replicate. Anyone want to run with that?
Sure, Martha, as long as you start me off with the Safe Church thing, I'm happy to do that.
All right. So now we have two out of the way.
Okay.
So then moving on to personal.
Well, and we need somebody for the community outreach program.
Right, community outreach.
You know, I can look into model policies of other police departments. I can run with that.
Okay, great. And Chief, I'm happy to support you with that because I have some thoughts on, you know, how to kind of rotate partner agencies and so on.
Great.
So,
okay.
Cool.
So the personal complaint form reporting procedure on the PD's website, again, I think that's a relatively easy lift because although you need a little bit of technical background, but the other people can do that. A personal complaint, people envision that as a secure way that they can make a formal complaint against the police or against someone in the community.
I thought what the idea was
I read it as personnel as opposed. I read it as personal as opposed to personnel. So it's internal.
Yes, so it was more an idea that, okay, this is how you can report it. This is the forms for it. This is how to proceed. And hopefully that would also have a link to the ombudsman or that group. So if you forwarded it, for example, if you actually filled it out online, you don't want it just to go to the general police department because that would discourage people from filling it out. So I think that's a good idea. Maybe it does go directly to an ombudsman or someone in that position. Although that said too, some things maybe they have comfortable. Maybe they have the choice. Maybe you could go to my office or the ombudsman. But
yeah, and that's where I think instead of just putting it in an anonymous complaint that sort of just leaves everybody feeling unsatisfied, that this is where we, direct people through the ombudsman or the Office of Human Rights, whatever it is that we're going to end up naming this. But certainly a change to the way we have it now. So do you think this goes hand in hand with the other?
I think it's related to the ombudsman.
Yeah, I think it merged.
Google.
You merged the two? Yeah. Okay. All right. And so again, was this personnel complaints or against third parties?
This would have to be personnel complaints.
Okay.
But I just Googled NYPD personnel complaint online, and I haven't clicked the link, but it goes to looks like the CCRB. So whether it's a separate CCRB or not, I'm sure there's, a mechanism there that we can examine and review.
Okay.
All right. Sorry, let me just get back to my list again. Pardon me. Okay. So the next is and that also, someone's going to put up the procedure too. That'll be part of that complaint. It'll all be laid out. Okay. All right. So the next would be the community survey, which some folks have already run with and made a fabulous survey. Although we discussed it a little before, do we want to go back and continue discussing it? Are we okay?
Well, the question is, do we think that the survey is a valuable, forget about this current survey right now, but going forward, do we think the survey is a valuable tool for us to employ to gauge our success in the community or our advances with the community going forward? Something like twice a year to be able to just maybe like a 10-question survey, not like a mega survey, but just, targeting certain ideas, issues that we want to gauge. Any thoughts?
You're not actually talking about a survey. You're actually talking about developing kind of what your KPIs or your performance indicators are for, the police. That's where I would start with. And then, one way to measure that is to do a community survey. It feels like you have to know what you want to measure before you can just say, oh, right. It's an idea to survey people on an annual basis. Like, what do we want to know from people on an annual basis?
Right. I think if we do the big survey, that would probably give us those 10 areas, right? Yeah.
Or it could be off also if there is some new thing that Chief, that the police officers or we're seeing something bubble up and now it's time to explore that a bit more with the community. Let's say there's some increase in something, I don't know. But so the idea is that there's a mechanism for following up on like that, or what Ivy is saying, like this, the goals that have been set. I assume, is there a goal setting process you go in annually or biannually or something?
Do I
do you, yeah, is there, or like with the town, do you guys set goals like that for the police?
It's part of my budget process. I set goals.
All right.
So, you know, we administer surveys and then set targets based on the results, right? So that would probably be the same. Mm-hmm. Targets, what you want to, where you are, where you want to be, and then you work towards those targets. So I think, I for one think it's very valuable to try to get as much information as possible from the community. Mm-hmm. But I know that, Jill, I just sent you a couple resources maybe to use.
Thank you.
One is a person who develops surveys, and that might be more in line with what you need right now based on the fact that surveys been, the bones of it have been pretty much developed by the team.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Honestly, I hadn't even thought about ongoing surveys. I was really only focused on this survey. And, you know, I certainly, I think, I agree. We have to know what we're surveying first before we can send them out. I don't want to just send out surveys for the heck of it. And I'm concerned that twice a year would be too frequent. And, you know, I think we have
I don't think
really
we need to just, I don't think we need to really decide that now. I just think it's a matter of whether or not we think it's a valuable tool moving forward to be able to, that's it.
Okay.
We don't want to burn people out, and we want to make sure enough people
No,
respond.
absolutely not.
Right.
Value. All right. So internal department
okay,
survey.
before we move on, who's going to write up the recommendation on surveying?
Well,
we've already started that. So maybe whoever what was it? Hermione and Kim, was it you two who started that?
Well, we did through CRE. We basically took the, we did the survey. Yeah.
You want to
we put it together.
Yeah.
I mean, sure.
Makes sense.
No, it's fine. I'm just, I'm just trying to think what kind of, what the recommendation would be. I'll think about it. Yes. Okay. We'll do it.
But I think maybe,
I feel like what Christine said makes a lot of sense. And the chief also said, you know, get the results of the initial survey, which will help us to determine the areas in which we, you know, want to focus and want to improve. And then those become sort of the you know, focus of
the KPIs.
Yeah, right. I think, isn't that what you said?
Exactly what I said, yes.
Right, but the other thing is that we don't do it in a vacuum. We work with a professional survey person who is going to help us articulate what it is that we're seeking to get, and they will formulate the questions and put it in the proper format to help us get that information. So.
All right, so we need a professional survey. We need a survey professional.
Right, and Christine has provided me with a number of sources, and yeah.
Okay.
And you can provide some as well. We would figure it out.
All right.
Survey, internal department survey.
Chief?
Yeah, that came up, and, you know, and part of it was, you know, how are we doing? You know, are our officers of color, do they feel comfortable, or are they experiencing what they feel is racism with the department? I mean, again, I would like to craft it with a professional, and, you know, and I know that there are other PDs that have done it. So that was something we talked about, and, you know, I think it's a good idea.
Are you aware of any in Westchester that do it? Or Dutchess County, where you are?
Not specifically, but I mean, Chief Ferry did it, you know, when he first took over. You know, I did. I remember that too. So, you know, I'd like to take a look at that, and I think we could craft it or have it done based upon, you know, I'm sure it's out there.
Is there an association of police chiefs you can bang this off of?
Yep. I would send it out to the Westchester County Police Chief, see what they have, and I can also do it to the New York State Chiefs of Police Association. So
then are we assigning that task to you to reach out and get a blueprint again, I think it's easier.
I think we all agree that that's, you know, it would be, I hope everybody agrees it's a good idea, you know, and then we can move forward with, okay.
Anyone else have any comment on that, or should we move to the next? What complaints misconduct should trigger board review, town board review? I think that's easy for Ivy or me to deal with. I'll deal with it. Ivy's got plenty on her plate. And also, I think we should just start. A good starting point of that is our council to advise, you know, how our scope, our ability, or how far we can go. And I think that's an easy start. What is the threshold? There must be some sort of legal threshold.
Well, there is, and there's a current, so that right now, the town board is in fact engaged in some level of review when there are in fact complaints, when there are charges. And so the real question ends up being, what does that look like now, and what might it look like? Right. But is there a lesser level that the board would want to see?
Yeah, I did a list today of all our personnel complaints in the last 5 years, which I could share with Jeremy and Ivy to get an idea what we're doing with. And of them, I think there were 17 total. 3 of them they had reviewed. It was the current one with officers on disciplinary charges, and the 2 use of force complaints that we've dealt with in the last 5 years. So everything else, you know, there was 5. The officer was rude. There was 3 that the officer was too slow to respond to a call or a traffic post. You know, there were some off-duty, there were verbal arguments that were deemed domestics by other agencies that we found out about and investigated. So, you know, the whole gamut. But I can forward with them.
Tell me now, right now, the board doesn't see all that stuff. The suggestion is they should see all that stuff. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, it depends. I mean, if someone was rude on a traffic stop, you know, it depends. Or they didn't show up on time. If someone's unhappy, if an officer shows up 3 minutes later than they wanted, or a minute, and again, should that go before us? I mean, that seems to be much. If there's an arrest, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, in some of the work I do, like there's serious incidents, there's reportable incidents, there's all these different like categories of things. But the board of my organization is responsible to review all minor non-reportable things for the trend, not for the individual. Like they don't need to know who was involved. Like they would say, there have been 3 incidents where this injury happened as a minor injury, but they're all in the same place and they're all happening at the same time. So it's like looking at the trend.
I think that's terrific, because if you're hearing repeatedly that officers are late, for example, I'm not saying that they are, right, then we know we have to say, Chief, your officers are not responding timely. I'm making that up. I'm not saying that's the case.
Yeah, or what's going on there. Look into it. What's happening? More information.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
This could even be, you know, outside of like what complaints or misconduct should trigger a review. Like maybe there's also a way to, Chief, build in, you know, kind of like what we've done with Rob Deary. Now we have him coming before the town board on a quarterly basis to give us an update on budget numbers, right? And we did that because it felt really important to this town board to be much more sort of tightly managing our finances. Like I'm wondering, you know, maybe it's not quarterly, but maybe it's, you know, twice a year or something, having an evening where you come to a work session and give us an update on, you know, the kinds of issues you've been dealing with, and, you know, if there are complaints or if there are issues that, you know, kind of require attention. I'm kind of thinking off the top of my head that there might be a way to do this, so that isn't just about the negative, isn't just about, you know, but misconduct, but is sort of more broad.
It might also identify systemic issues. You know, if there's something in the way something is happening, that you see a trend that the chief might not see without having like a discussion with the board about it. And somebody goes, well, wait a minute, this is what it looks like to me. And it opens up a conversation about, okay, so what systems are in place and what maybe do we need to like look at to perhaps change or add to, or make sure we include. You know, so that there is, it gives a little bit of an objective feedback, I think. So in that sense, I think that would be a really good thing to just kind of like present the.
I think it's a great idea. You know, and one of those examples about the officers not being on a traffic post, it was Woodburn and Greeley, where I had really terrible crossing guards that weren't showing up, and then an officer recovering get called away, and it was just a misunderstanding by the public. That's what we're doing, and we've addressed that and hired a full-time professional for it. So, yeah, if I don't see it in a second pair of eyes, that's fine by me. So I don't object to that if that's what the group wants. You know, and I just one example, half of them are just very, very minor infractions. And I think it's good to the board to know that as well.
Yeah, and likewise, you know, like, yeah, I think they are really minor things, and we get some of them too, right? And then, you know, I end up forwarding them along to you, but sometimes it's like you and me, and maybe the whole rest of the board doesn't know about, you know,
right?
People complaining that they can't make a left-hand turn, you know, on such and such a street, you know, like
every street.
That's kind of the level of complaints we're working with here.
You know, but there's also like, you know, I've had a couple of people who've talked about someone who directs traffic and does it very rudely. Yeah. You know, and it's kind of like my saying, well, why don't you just give the chief? Well, you know, I really don't want to bother him about that, you know, but it's a systemic issue, right? And how was that being dealt with that particular officer? You know, I don't even know who the officer is, but how is that being dealt with that particular officer? Or is there training that he needs to have, or, you know, anger management courses or something, you know, that that I think would be great for the board to be able to kind of, you know, say to the people in town, you know, we hear that there are concerns and we're addressing them.
I think the board is aware.
Really? Somebody spilled the beans? I'm shocked.
Okay. I want to run with that, or Jeremy, did you want to run with that? That, you know, the what trigger board review, or just even come up with a semi-annual, you know, discussion with the board.
Jeremy and I can work on this one together. The town board one.
And I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget the racial nature of things too. Like there should be an eye on all of this from the point of view of BIPOC people and from the potential of systemic racism. Like that, we can't lose it. And I'm not sure what the best mechanism is, but we should make sure we don't lose that.
Well, I think actually the next one might in some way address that, which is the tracking demographics on traffic stops. Might be you know, a way to ensure that does not get lost. And I would guess, Chief, there's got to be some systems out there that departments use in terms of how they keep track of the demographics of traffic stops.
Are there? No.
I mean, I've been looking at it. You know, I guess this was a subject that got a lot of different opinions about it. So where are we on it? You know, are we on a consensus to go forward with it? But yeah, it would also, it might include looking into a new record management system for it, a new way of tracking it. So, but
is there? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just for the purpose of discussion, could somebody restate what this actually is? That the police are noting the race as best as they understand it in the traffic stop. Is that what we're really talking about?
Is that what we're asking them for? Because there's no way for us to get that information off the documentation that an officer would be asking for, other than, yeah. I'm sorry.
Right, because it's not on the driver's license. We determined that last time.
Right.
You know, if they want to identify themselves particularly, that's fine. Otherwise, the police officer, you know, should be including something in the notation. But this is also twofold. Like Chief had suggested earlier, not with respect to this, but this is going to be short-term, meaning Newcastle, but it's also going to be long-term, something that has to go to New York State, because Newcastle can affect the tickets that are drafted within the confines of Newcastle. But when anything involves the county police, they have their own separate types of tickets that do not include the demographics. So that's a recommendation that has to go to the state, because that paperwork has to be changed. That's really important just to move forward. Am I right, Chief?
Yes, that was the proposal of the group, but there was there was change in the law, but not for traffic stops. It was for summonses and arrests that will be required across the state to obtain that knowledge and be able to share it.
Right, but we need it for traffic stops though, because that's, you know, quite honestly, you know, that's where a lot of this is discovered and found, and you know, it's relatively minor in the scope of, you know, whatever else the police departments have to deal with, but it's probably the primary what's the word, aggravant for any other word to the population we're talking about, you know, when we're trying to you know, we're trying to make this all more equal and transparent. Does that make sense?
The only thing I know, Kim, you said, if I understood, you said the officer could observe and say X, or how someone identifies themselves. Can you imagine if the officer said, "How do you identify yourself, ma'am?"
No, and I'm just talking among us.
I asked that question. I asked that question.
You're right. You know, unless there's some paperwork or, you know, but obviously they're looking at what licenses, which don't determine, you know, demographics that way. Insurance certainly doesn't. So, you know, I guess you are primarily relying on the police officer's understanding.
And I think, you know, actually that was the, sorry, Kim.
No, you're right, Martha, it's a point. You're right. You're absolutely right.
You know, because that was what we had talked about, and what I raised is how is an officer supposed to know? And the response I got from a couple of people is it's whatever his or her perception is. It's not what the reality is necessarily, it's what their perception is.
You may have some mistakes, but what you're looking for is a trend. And if you see that most of the people stopped are people of color, then, you know, that suggests something. So if an officer's wrong about one or two people when they're white, also I would include in that not just race, but also ethnicity.
Yes.
The officer's perception of what the ethnicity is.
Yes.
Just in general groups. What I'm really meaning is Hispanic or non-Hispanic.
Do we already get gender?
No,
we don't get gender either. So we do not track demographics on traffic stops currently.
Should we? Well, we should just put it all in there then. I mean, it's not too difficult to write M and F, you know, for male, female, or whatever. If we're filling that out, do you agree?
It's incredibly difficult to tabulate the results.
I feel like if you're going to collect demographic information, you want it to be accurate. And what I'm hearing in the group here is it's going to be very hard to get accurate information in a way that doesn't create a dynamic that takes on a really challenging maybe interaction between the police officer or the person that they're stopping. So I think I want to go back to Jill's question. Does anyone know of anything that currently exists that can gather data like this?
I feel like a key component of this is that if an officer is assuming your race, that's part of the problem, right? Like like I'm Indian, I get mistaken for being Hispanic all the time. So what does that say about your own implicit bias?
Well, that's actually the point. I mean, I think that the point is, what if I could envision a policy where the officer isn't asking. They just are responsible to write down what they believed, because what they believed is their bias. It would be their bias, and so it would allow us then to say the officers seem to be stopping people who they believed are all Black, Hispanic, or like that tends to be the thing. And then it doesn't necessarily matter what you are. It matters more how the police are acting on their bias.
Exactly.
Does that make sense to you, Don? I mean, because that's kind of
totally. That's exactly what I was trying to say.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the point.
That's the point.
Chief, can I ask you, when an arrest is made and the pedigree information is taken, does an officer ask the person arrested their race, or is that just something the officer does out of observation?
They usually ask, but it's a whole series of questions, right? It's all
Right.
You know, religion, that's a city, but you know, they're not required to answer.
Okay, but these are stops where we're not issuing tickets.
Let me.
I think they want all stops, but the data will be collected for violations through the court.
There are police stops where their tickets are not issued, and I forget what they're called.
It was one of them.
Name. Right, and that needs to be right. Okay, that needs to be put in writing. You know, these demographics have to be, you know, tracked.
So let me just say one thing that I know people are ignoring, and I think there always is that possibility too. I would say if I'm a good guy, I'm a good cop. Well, I'm not going to assume that cops or anything, but if I want to be generous, we'll use that term, and I let people listen. This is a warning. Don't do it again. This is a warning. Don't do it again. Now it's going to seem if I let some particular more white people, more African American people, more Hispanic people, by not ticketing them, it's going to then seem like I am only stopping Hispanic people. I'm only stopping Black people. I'm only stopping white people, because it's going to skew there's a reason why if you're not ticketing them, it's going to look like you're just stopping people of a potential certain group just because of that, because you're letting them go and they're not getting a ticket. So then why'd you stop them in the first place?
I also
agree, and
like that's a question.
No, I think it's real.
You know, I think too, this kind of practice, I mean, if this community was the only community that engaged in a practice like this, and that people from other communities are intersecting and being pulled over, I mean, that's a whole other dynamic that's going to be taking place within the context of those conversations. So nowhere else I mean, I think that a practice and a procedure like this is important. I think it's probably something that has to be statewide, not community-wide, because of the implications of what potentially could happen between that interaction.
Well, but we're trying to do that. I mean, it's a short term and it's a long term. As I said a little while ago, short term is implementing it in Newcastle, because that, you know, can be done more immediately. Long term is making this a recommendation to the state for them to change procedures throughout the state.
Yeah, so I think that works for a lot of different potential practices, but I think there are also some practices that have to be statewide and can't be centered on one particular community. And I'm not sure if this is one of those or not, but there's going to be an experience in our community that's going to be vastly different potentially than other communities when our community interacts with our police officers, if there's a conversation about who people are and how they identify when they're pulled over. Even
it doesn't have to be.
Why? I mean,
there doesn't have to be a conversation at all.
Oh, I know, but I'm sharing with you, like, even the question of whether or not someone is male or female, someone may not even identify.
We're not asking the person that we're dealing with the perception of the police officer.
Right. Correct. So and I understand that, but so in terms of what are you hoping to gather through that data? If you don't even know if the perception was accurate or not, since you're not there, I guess that's what my question is, right? How are you hoping to use that data in a way that's going to inform practice so that the Newcastle Police Department can change an area that has been identified that needs to be addressed? How would you use the data? That's kind of I guess that's what I want to say.
Looking for a trend. And if 75% of the people who are stopped are people of color, then you go to the chief and go, why is this? Can you explain this?
Based on the perception of the police who pulled them over.
That's right.
So they're perceiving them as BIPOC citizens.
Yes.
Not necessarily, that information is not necessarily accurate, but it's the
right.
Right?
Correct.
It's just about the bias of the police officer. That's all it's about. Because we're all biased. I mean, bias is part of everything. That's not that's a human thing. But we're trying to track the bias of the police officers because they have this authority in our community. and we want to make sure it's done correctly. That's all. Does that make sense to people?
Do we track where people who we pull over are from and whether they're residents of our community or people who are outside of our community?
Right now, we just track the location and the plate number.
The location where we pull them over?
And the plate number, because they're required to give a vehicle description, the plate number, and their location. So.
And the plate number can provide their, well, the domicile for purposes of the car registration.
No, the car.
The car.
You know.
Right.
I understand why the group wants it. I'm just curious or worried about the perception of my officers about it. You know, that.
Well, let me ask you, is it a problem if the procedures just change to include demographics? I mean, does there really even have to be a reason? It's added information, you know, that may be utilized moving forward for various purposes. Should it really make a difference?
I think it would, but you know.
Well, that indicates a problem.
Chief, no, go ahead. More. I want to know more, Chief, about why the police, the officers would feel.
Because they don't want to be perceived that if there are landscaping trucks that are, I don't know, coming through the place.
I feel like there's maybe there's a perception out there that there is a problem, you know, and then that's what it feels like. We're looking to, you know, prove it. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to.
But unfortunately, there is though, you know, and I hate to say that, but unfortunately, there really is. We've already, you know, given several instances where we know several people who have been pulled over for just almost as a matter of routine, to the point that people avoid going a particular way to get to the parkway. I mean, it's something that like Vince said, we all have biases. We do. Everybody has some bias in them. But we do need to try to track these types of biases, and it may be beneficial to you because then you can then speak to a particular officer saying, you know what, I just noticed that over the last couple of months you've had a few stops, and can you just let's explore this a little bit. It all seems to be, you know, I don't know how you want to approach your officer, but it would be helpful to you in how to speak to that officer also in the officer's ongoing training, I would imagine.
I mean, haven't you also said they already do implicit bias training? They should be aware that this is real.
Yeah.
You know, I just, it's ultimately, you know, it's not my recommendation as a group, that recommendation. I'm just expressing, you know.
Yeah, no.
These are not your recommendations, Chief.
Right.
I think I would be uncomfortable if you asked me to walk around and start trying to identify people. It would make me uncomfortable doing it.
But I think it's going to discourage action at times as well, when it may be warranted.
Right, but Christine, you don't have the authority to give me a ticket.
I know. I understand. I'm like, so then I'm thinking, can you expand it? Can it be about age? Can it be about, like, can you make it bigger than just one issue? But then when we're sitting here talking about race, so should it be expanded? But then I'm thinking as a professional, would I feel comfortable making a judgment call about who somebody is based on my visual perception? I think the answer to that for me is probably no. And that's what I think I hear Jim saying as part of what his concerns are about a practice like this. But you know, I hear what everyone says. I also understand the benefits of it. So I just want to voice that.
But I don't think you can ask people their race, though. That's
right. I agree.
That wouldn't be
right.
I think the other hard part about this too is understanding how the data is going to be used before we implement the program. So it's thinking about when it gets captured, who's reviewing the data, and what are they doing with it, and is it public data? Is it data that the chief is using and that the department's using, but is not public data? Like, what are we trying to do with this data? And the other thing that comes to mind for me is like, so what's the goal here? Like, what are you trying to get to? So, you know, the very obvious, you know, if 75% of the people that you stop are, you know, Black and brown people, you've got a problem. Yes, at 75%, all of us can clearly say that's a problem. If it's 30%, is that a problem? I don't know. Like, where does that line fall? You know, and I want to be careful that we're not creating a problem for ourselves by collecting data that we aren't thinking through how we're going to use, and be really thoughtful about that. I just want to put that out there.
The problem that we have is we are missing so much data of things we know occur. And if we don't start acquiring the data, we can't really do anything to try to legitimately change it, the trend. And I think it's incredibly important to gather this information. And, you know, it's not something that you're going to necessarily chalk up, you know, and keep a tally for every officer for every month. And at the end of the month say, oh, by the way, you stopped X, Y, and Z, and 75% of them were X, Y, Z. This is long-term information that we can use to, or whatever group continues to review this on an ongoing basis, can utilize to determine, do we need to make other changes? That's really what this is being used, what would be used for us to try to keep the whole integrity of the racial equity aspect to this group moving forward in the right direction. That's what that data is going to be used for.
Is this a state recommendation?
No.
I think it's
so.
both.
It should be. Yeah. But one of the things I want to say.
Yeah, it's local and.
I would just want to say, Kim, and kind of going back to what the chief said, if I were a police officer and I had to write this down, I know it's going to reflect on me. I think we have to understand that's how the police are going to think about it. And we should be upfront about it. It's just, yes, it's part of, you should be reflecting on the fact that 75% of the people that you stop are Black and brown.
I agree.
You? Like, what? Yeah, I mean, I think I think there's no way to avoid it. I think you got to just say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not like try to hide it.
When I said 75%, that was meant to be an example. That's
no, I know. I don't believe.
No, we know that.
Right. But if I'm the police officer and the facts are, I am doing that, I got to look in the mirror. What am I doing? Aren't we hoping that our police officers reflect on their profession and their skill? I mean, aren't we hoping that? This is data to help them.
You know, I don't have an area yet to research. So do you want me to do, can I volunteer for this one and I can see what other places are doing? I can bring it to the next meeting. Does it, if anyone wants to
Christine.
I think the other part of this is making sure that actually the bias training is working. I mean, that's another way to use this is the training that the officers are getting the right training? Is it making a difference? Is it making them kind of sit back and think about, gee, am I really, you know, am I approaching this the right way? I mean, I think that's another way to look at it is how good is the training, you know, and that will show that for you, Chief, as well. You know, is the bias training actually working, or maybe you need to go with a different bias training. I mean, so I think that also gives you the data to help support the kind of training that you're offering.
Are we ready to move on to the next one?
I think so. All right, so a CCRB. I can give my personal take, but anyone else want to join in first? I've been speaking plenty. All right, seeing no hands. I do not support a CCRB. I think that we're too small of a community. I don't think there's an overwhelming need for it. I think if we have the right ombudsman in place, we have other mechanisms or means to address this. Again, if we also look at how the town board triggers its review too, there's other ways to get our hands on those issues that wouldn't require a specific CCRB, whereas New York City may be the extreme where they have regularity because of the size of the police force. I just think it's not necessary here, but that's my opinion.
I agree with Jeremy. I'd also note the county's talking about an Office of Professional Accountability, I think it's called, which would have a regional jurisdiction, but it wouldn't be able to mete out any punishments or sanctions against officers. That would be left to the individual departments.
It would seem to me that we're putting other things in place right now for the board to look at, and there to be kind of like the follow-up, and that maybe this is something that gets held for the future if the need, if it turns out that what the board is going to take on in doing reviews doesn't work, or the Ombudsman program doesn't work, then it gets revisited. But to me, it feels like having the Ombudsman and having also the board kind of getting more actively, or having hearing reports and kind of having that exchange and a little more accountability, I think it is sufficient. But I would like to hear from our BIPOC members as to what they think about that.
Can I ask one question first? Are we equating basically a CCRB with also a community advisory board? Because we had talked about that, which sounds to me like it was a little bit different. And I think a citizen advisory board, which I think, Chief, you would actually recommend it. You'd like the idea of a citizen advisory board, which to me connotes something different than a CCRB. So are these two separate things, or are we putting these together? I just want to be clear on what we're talking about.
I saw at least this bullet here as a CCRB.
I saw the Citizen Advisory Board as going back to our, the semi-annual community outreach program and a model policy.
Okay. All right, and you'll include that in that recommendation?
Yes.
Because I just want to make sure, because that I think is really valid.
Yes.
I understand, that the distinction between that and the CCRB. So I just want to make sure at least that was addressed. Okay.
Right.
Anyone else want to share their thoughts? Good, bad, or indifferent?
Quiet meeting.
All right. So moving on then to Officer Wellness Wellbeing Program.
Wait a minute.
Is that a decision? There isn't going to be a CCRB?
Yeah, that's why I said I would like to. That's why I said I would like to hear from some of the BIPOC members of this group before we say no. We're just going to move on and let this go, because I think it's an important aspect of this. So. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is anyone willing to kind of speak about this and pro or con and how you feel about it?
Besides the size of our town, are there other reasons against having a CCRB?
I don't think the nature of the CCRBs that at least I have dealt with got information as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, they were much more extreme than someone saying this police officer was disrespectful. This police officer shouldn't have stopped me. What I have is, black and blue beating up people who say this. I was roughed up and I was assaulted and I was really beaten down. Terrible condition, black eyes and things like that. It doesn't have to be that extreme, but those are the type of things that I've seen in my 20 years of experience on both sides of the law. And I don't think we're having anything to that level here. And I think that anything on a much lower level, improper behavior or conduct by a police officer, can be dealt through these other mechanisms. So that's just, again, that's my view.
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from, but I feel like any form of discrimination at all should just not be tolerated, and any form of issues that we come across with the police should be treated equally. I'm not saying that having an unpleasant encounter is the same thing as being beaten down, but I'm also saying that it's not necessarily in my opinion, respectful to say that someone's experience doesn't matter because it's not as extreme as being beaten up.
But I don't think that's really what's being said, because it'd be one thing if there was no other means to address that recourse, in my view, and it was either all or nothing. So there's some redundancy then in what we're doing, and we don't need to have redundancy. And if you have an ombudsman, if you can have a lower threshold for the town board to review, if it's easier to make a complaint and you can get assistance, like through an outreach in some capacity, how many different layers do you need to do this? What is basically the same thing. How do you differentiate the two then? You're really repeating that service. So I'm not disputing what you're saying at all, zero, but I don't think this is the means to do it. I think what we're discussing before, in my view, are the means to do it.
So the role of the ombudsman we discussed was basically someone to be able to file a complaint and handle as an intermediary, right? Yes. Which is not the same as the civilian review board, right? Also, Jeremy?
No, go ahead.
No, so I don't see it as overlapping. I see them as completely different tasks. Another point that Kimberly made in the last meeting was we know that Chief Carroll has done a lot to change the force, the police department. We can see the improvement. We see that the police department we have today is a very, very different police department from what it was 10 years ago, which leads me to say we're just one bad police chief away from things, from, you know, people being beaten black and blue or whatever you think rise to the occasion of needing a civilian review board. So I think it's very important that we do have systems in place that, you know, if Chief Carroll retires tomorrow or in 2 years, we do want to have systems in place that will protect all the residents of this town.
Well, I agree with that. Sorry, finish up. I apologize.
No, I just wanted to say and give them an outlet and recourse.
So I don't think that we are, you know, a chief away from people ending up black and blue. I think that may be extreme. You know, to at least to the extent that, as I think you're describing it, I think maybe the better answer then is to re-examine or further examine what it means to be an ombudsman. Because let's assume, and it's so hard to assume what they would deal with the CCRB, but if they're, you know, if you're going to train someone, are they going to, these 5 people on a board in a small community that know each other, is it going to be just even further uncomfortable? You're going to now go before, you know, a bunch of different people to examine this issue, as opposed to maybe just one person who then can then refer that to either the chief directly, but we may say that's not a good idea because that would be just internal. It goes to the town board. So, you know, the size of our community is relevant. And I just think that we can expand other areas to touch this and address this issue. We don't need a separate CCRB.
I'm a little unsettled because I feel like it's not dramatic to say that we're one police chief away from having our civilians end up black and blue. I mean, if you look at, like, I understand that size is different, but I'm just using it as an example. If you look at the NYPD today, ProPublica reported that they received over 880 chokehold complaints since Eric Gardner. So obviously something is not adding up in our police system, and we're always close to huge problems if we don't address the small ones.
Can I just ask a question quickly of Dara and Hermione? When it comes to a citizen review board, a CCRB, what do you see as the benefits that, like, if we were to have one locally, what would you expect to see happen? Like, what do you want to get out of having a CCRB for Newcastle? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. The reason I'm asking the question is that I'm trying to understand whether there is overlap with the ombudsman and the discussion that we had earlier about that role, or if there's something missing that would you know, sort of speak to the reason to create this.
I actually have a thought about that. I mean, I don't want to cut anybody off, but the ombudsman seems like a facilitator of a complaint. It's not the person who is going to have any authority to say this needs to happen. So if we had an ombudsman who facilitates the complaint and it is something serious, right? Chief, into it, who's accountable for dealing with it? Just the chief, or is the town board, or like
the town board? The chief and the town board. So the question is how many, so we already have two, we are hoping to have multiple layers in existence. First, an ombudsman, which is something very different than that we haven't had before. And then the chief and the town board. And Dara and Hermine, although I appreciate the challenges that civilians have had with the New York City Police Department, we are not the New York City Police Department.
And that's fine, because I want to know if there's a critical piece that's missing, right? Like that a CCRB would fill a need that we don't have in our community today, regardless of the fact that we're small. Like what that wasn't my point, that we're not getting at today with what we've proposed so far.
So Jill, first of all, I was not the one who made the comments about the New York City Police. Ivy, I would say with an expanded role of the ombudsman, and they can refer cases to the town board. You're right, we may not need the civilian review board.
But I wasn't, just to be clear, I wasn't saying we don't need a civilian complaint review board. I'm asking genuinely, because I haven't personally made up my mind yet. And to hear you and Dara say that you think it is something that we need was why I wanted to push you a little bit to articulate what function do they serve that we need.
With respect to anything being referred to the town board, I thought there were only particular triggers that brought these to the town board. So are we saying that virtually anything can be brought to the town board if the ombudsman says that there's an issue here? So I'm now a little confused, because I was always under the impression, well, since these meetings started, that there were just certain things that triggered that action. Otherwise, chief would handle it, and then certain instances, certain things had to go to the town board. So
right, and so what you've asked us to do is to take a look at the things that have traditionally gone to the town board, and have asked us to expand those, and that's what Ivy and Jeremy are working on, is whether or not there would be an expanded role for the town board to take a look at certain trends, certain issues, certainly, use of force complaints would certainly be top on the list. The town board right now is informed of use of force complaints. We have, this is not, this is nothing new.
Yeah.
As far as it goes.
But maybe, that the ombudsman's role as the people who are going to articulate it could have a power to say, no, this has to go to the town board. Like we have to trust their discretion, because of whatever they know from the person they're sort of facilitating. The town needs to hear about this. So I think there should be the town board, but they should include that.
Especially if there's not going to be any type of civilian review board.
Yeah.
Because we have to kind of, fill that hole. That's a little issue.
Nothing would already prevent the ombudsman if they weren't happy with a report and investigation from referring it to the town board.
Right.
And just articulating that to make it clear would be helpful.
Codifying it, basically, yeah.
I'm sorry, can I just push for just a second more, Kim? Because you just said, especially if we don't have a citizen review board, we have to fill that hole. I'm really trying to understand what's the hole.
There has to be a clear envoy, if you will, that sends this information that's received to the town board, separate and apart from the chief. And it didn't sound to me earlier on that that's what the Ombudsman, I can never pronounce that word, I apologize, was intended to do. But it is something that a civilian review board could do, would be handling these complaints, if you will, and basically reviewing them and trying to manage them and in determining what the next step would be. But if the ombudsman, I'm sorry, if the liaison would simply be able to make a determination, it's relevant enough and is important enough and serious enough that the town board has to review it, then give that authority to them. And then we don't need another board that would otherwise do that. You see what I'm saying? Would otherwise take that role. Okay.
Can I ask just a question, because I don't know how the police system works too. Jim, if someone has do they have recourse through like the Office of Civil Rights or like the State Ed Department has an agency where if a parent feels after they've gone through a process in a school district that their needs haven't been met, they have a way of going to the state to find relief or to have something addressed. Is there like that here somewhere?
I mean, they certainly go to a district attorney if they felt necessary, make a complaint to them.
Not if it rises to truly a criminal action that would, would involve. I don't know. I mean, I think Christine, what Christine is talking about, I think those types of offices hear more than just complaints about harm to your physical person. I mean, injustices in general. I mean, that's part of why Hermione had come up with that whole office of human rights and racial equity. But we've moved that over into a liaison. I can't say it. The state does have an office similar to that, but these small things, I mean, who is going to go to the state and get them involved? We're looking for a local answer to that we don't have right now. That's the hole we're trying to fill, quite honestly. We're trying to fill a hole.
Is there a hole? Is there an allegation that
that hasn't been addressed?
That there's a problem or an issue that isn't happening? I understand the whole thing with the future chief, but a future chief would come from somebody at this point working under me and be interviewed and approved by our town board, who are very familiar with our officers. So I don't just see something like that automatically just happening. We're not going from somewhere else. We don't know the history of it. So, I mean, I think the ombudsman, for one, I think, depending on what Jeremy and Ivy come up with they are civilians, but police as well. So I personally feel like we're covered, but it's up to the group.
Yeah, if they're in existence, I mean, if they're in existence, right, and they're given certain abilities, number one, to help file anonymous complaints, et cetera, be a liaison to the complainant, if you will, and you, if the complainant doesn't want to have direct contact, but also in referring things to the town board that person believes is important enough to do so, then I think we do resolve the fact that maybe a CCRB or any type of civilian review board is not necessary, as long as that person can do those things. That's what I'm saying. That needs to be, I think that needs to be clearly written and set out. Does anybody disagree with that or agree or have comments?
I agree. I think the substitute saying expand the role of the ombudsman.
Yeah.
So I think we just have to look at how far we can expand it. And I think that's also more efficient than having, let's say, 5 people in town, in this small town, who know, keeping that comfort zone is probably far easier with one person than it is a bunch of different people too.
And so I guess my question then would be to Hermione and Dara, who spoke out in favor of a citizen review board. If we were to expand the sort of definition and roles and responsibilities of the ombudsman in the way that Kim is suggesting, does that suffice? Or are there other functions of a citizen review board that, you know, that are not being met under our model yet?
So I am definitely more comfortable with that. My main, like, the way my mind was working was I was just thinking about checks and balances as a whole. It would just be nice to know that there are other people holding people accountable throughout the whole process.
And I mean,
that makes sense.
Like I'm sorry.
You know, and I want you all to know that, you know, I take my job very seriously, and it's my job to uphold the reputation, you know, integrity of the department. So I do appreciate that, but, you know, I take it very seriously, and well, I just feel like I want to say that.
Well, and that goes without saying. I mean, nobody has anything otherwise to say. It's just, you know, it's a matter of laying the groundwork for the future so that we don't have to revisit this. Because in the future, we may not be in a position to do that.
To that point, though, on the other hand, it's not that we can't revisit it. You know, I think we're going to have to revisit it. In fact, if we have an ombudsman serving with this kind of responsibility, and we have a town board that's, you know, suddenly playing a more active role, you know, we've got to get trained up on how to play that role too. You know, so like, it's going to take some time to make sure that we get the model right, and that, you know, all of the things that we want to have, you know, all the success we want to have with this new model is realized. And I feel like we owe it to ourselves to check in on this and say, is it working? Is it not working? Is there some other function? Is there some other person, some other board or whatever that we now need to introduce because these needs are not being met through the model that we
and to some extent we've done it already. You know, Hermine acted as an ombudsman. Sorry, you got me going, Kimberly.
That's true. I'm sorry, I always have a hard time.
And I think Hermine did explain that she was very pleased with the process.
Yeah.
Yes, just affirming. Yeah, and Ivy, I'm quite okay with the new proposed the expanded role of the ombudsman and referring appropriate cases onto the town board. It is something I'm okay with revisiting it in the future and proceeding with what was proposed.
Thank you.
That sounds like a decision.
Yay.
And it's
there's one down.
Yeah, so a little disappointing.
Hey, we're halfway through.
I'd like to suggest that actually the officer wellness and well-being program could be combined with the critical incident stress debriefing, because that's all of one piece.
Yeah.
And certainly the posting of key department policies on our website, that doesn't need any.
I object.
Too bad.
Outrageous. And I'm the committee chairman.
So I just think on those two that we kind of, you know, and maybe next time we start talking, and actually we have a little bit about the policing activity data being collected. We've already basically covered that when we were talking about tracking. See, Kim, you did it to me now. Tracking demographics on traffic stops. I mean, that's kind of, I think, also begun that conversation. I mean, that's one part of it, I think, right? The rest of it is about shooting firearms, discharges, things like that. Because there's the next thing down. Should the demographic data be included? So,
the only problem was, I mean, a lot of this stuff gets included anyway. The only problem, the reason we were highlighting the traffic stops and the traffic tickets is because right now, the paperwork involved in processing those things absolutely does not include that information. So, you know, when you get into the more serious allegations, the various police and court documents reflect the demographics. So that's almost, you know, a done deal.
So what are we for lack of a better term, debating now?
Jill just said it's 8 o'clock.
But I think we're in agreement. And Chief, you're collecting a lot of this data anyway. Doesn't the county and state and local municipalities collect all this data with shootings, firearms, or you don't, as a matter of course?
No, I have all the data for them. I mean, some of it's more easier to flush out, but I have that, yeah.
I think what the point was that that Martha was making is that, well, we came to a decision on the Citizen Review Board, which is great, but then the next two items on the list can be discussed jointly, I guess, at our next meeting, I'm assuming, and that she was pointing out that these other items we've discussed to a certain extent, so that should lessen the discussion at our future meeting. You know, as far as feeling that we've gotten through a lot more of this than appears at first glance.
Would anybody want to would anybody want to take the lead on what policies to be posted on the website? You know, coming up with something there.
What's the max that we can put on the website now, Chief? Because I do know that you have some of them already on the website.
I was thinking about it. I mean, I think our policies, it's an estimate about 1,000 pages long. I wonder if if we had to.
Can you bookmark it and put it on the
of each one and have people access it? But I think that's just too much information. You know, I think, you know, if somebody wants to look at what they think that the most common department policies are of concern to like a reform committee.
Don't you have use of force up already?
Yes.
Didn't we talk about
or just that?
Personnel complaints, deadly physical force, use of deadly force. So those are up, but I don't know if there's anything else that people are worried about.
Well, there was, I mean, we had a talk about making sure that the town knew that calling the police because somebody is Black in their neighborhood is actually a crime in itself. And
right.
And so the question is the education of
it's actually it's not a crime.
Okay.
They have the ability to be sued for it.
Okay.
Right. I
well, that's important information.
Yeah. Is that?
Well, actually, what is that? I had that statute at the last.
Yeah, you did. It's actually if somebody, I believe, calls 911 to report a bias incident that isn't bias.
Right.
It's not actually criminal. My understanding was that it was a civil action.
Well, Johanna gave me a write-up and I put it in the newsletter. So we've already solved this problem. Everybody knows about it now.
Right. I mean,
put it in about once every 2 months. You know?
That's not that's not a department policy for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the same.
So
thing.
Can I make a suggestion?
It was just developed.
It's after 8 o'clock, as Jill pointed out, and I haven't had dinner yet. So Jeremy, I'm wondering if for the next meeting, we can't have the groups report back and also cover these last couple of things.
I think so. Yeah. And I think I can also appoint you chair.
No, thank you.
And I actually found a really good model policy.
I just want to go have dinner. Yeah.
I also found a really good officer wellness and well-being model policy. So maybe I'll kick it out to the group, but.
Great.
Well, so thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. We actually did get through a lot, and then we'll see each other next time.
Okay. Right. Which is in what, 2 weeks? Are we meeting it? It's 2 weeks?
I have it in front of me.
Okay.
It's 2 weeks?
No, Tiffany? No, it's next week.
Next week.
Right.
Oh,
so
boy.
could we,
okay.
yeah, so could we have policies written and distributed before then? Even if it's the day before? So
I'll do my best.
A chance to read it before?
We'll try this.
All righty.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Do the best you can do, right? That's all anybody can do.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good night. Okay. Enjoy your dinner.
All right.
Okay. Have a good night.
Bye. Bye.